say I need to hear the truth. The sales pitch of eternal life and eternal youth. All these blessings you are bestowing upon the one you say is all-knowing. Or are they really deserved if he is sending me where you say I am?
Loneliness. My grandma had a lot of health issues that year and was in and out of a rehab center for probably about a year. So he lived on his own and didn't know how to do that. He had his companion for 60 years. And plus, I think with him being in the Navy and over at Pearl Harbor, I do think he suffered from PTSD. And it was just, you know, it is what it is as far as a combination. But like I said, the subject's a very special subject to me as far as just trying to learn more, being more alert, and try to help others survive this, because it's a serious thing. So I'm super excited to have Jennifer here and to educate us more in this subject. So I'm going to bring her on up. Thank you.
Don't clap until after if you think I was decent, and then if I was terrible, then you don't even have to clap.
I think you're all set up.
Okay.
I think.
Are y'all okay? I'm a professor, so I project my voice. Are y'all okay if I don't use the microphone, or would you prefer me to be on stage with pictures? I'm just joking. I'm just messing with you, Chad. I've made all these new friends tonight, so I get to use all your names, right? So interesting. I got here early tonight, and I went and sat at the bar and had some food. And there's a gentleman sitting there. And he's like, oh, you know, it's that typical bar, hotel bar conversation. Are you here for business or pleasure and all that kind of stuff? So I said, well, I'm here to give a talk tonight. And he's like, well, what on? And that's always like, that, if there's ever ice to be broken, it's when you tell somebody that you do suicide prevention for a living. And they're like, oh, where's the exit? Where's the nearest exit, right? Nobody wants to talk about that. He's like, yeah, okay. And he's like, well, he said, I guess if he's like, now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to kill myself, but if I did, I would find a way to do it. And I said, maybe not. And he says, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I said, if you were feeling suicidal and someone reached out to you from their heart to yours and said, I want you to live, and you might think, wow, okay, that's a start. And you may start thinking of reasons that you might want to live, you know? And so this gentleman came out to me as a conservative, and he said, I'm not, you know, he said, I've not been exposed to a lot of different things. I think in a very narrow-minded way. And we start talking about different subjects. I guess. I'm not talking loud enough, am I?
No, it's further. It's up there, so.
Oh.
And if you,
Okay, sure I can. All right, are we good? Am I on?
yeah.
Okay, all right. So, you know, he sort of said to me, you know, I don't know how to think about these things. And so I talked to him a little bit. And I think that's, you know, I told him that no matter what the topic is, whether it's suicide prevention or immigration or healthcare or any of those hot topics that we're talking about right now, because we're all wanting to vote real soon, you know, that it's about finding a place of common ground. And in my world, the common ground is that we would love for someone to stay alive. And that's something that we can all agree on usually, right? And when I say usually, I mean there's some gray areas. Suicide is not a one or the other sort of situation, right? It's a very hotly debated situation when you're talking about physician-assisted suicide. We have 8 states in the country that have physician-assisted, and we call it different things, death with dignity laws and things like that. So it becomes a little less sort of straightforward when we're talking about those sorts of things. Most of my work is in youth suicide prevention. That's by choice. I do you know, if I can save a life, I want to save anyone's life. I don't care how old or young you are. But most of my actual boots on the ground work is in working with youth and schools. So anyway, I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati. I go up for tenure this year. Woo woo. And I think I'm going to get it. Woo woo. And I have the honor of working with a national program called a Hope Squad. Hope Squad is a school-based suicide prevention program that takes youth who are already natural helpers and trains them and mentors them and supervises them to be those eyes and ears in a school. Because kids tell kids when they're in distress. They don't tell adults. We would love to think that our children would come to us and say, I'm struggling, I'm not doing well, Mom, I'm thinking about suicide. But that ain't how it works. Kids tell each other. They put it on social media, right? It's whispered in the hallways. It's in the bathrooms at the schools. You know, we don't talk about it out loud. So that's one of the biggest conundrums is people think that they buy into the myth that if we talk about suicide out loud, all of a sudden it's going to plant a seed, and someone who wasn't thinking about it is all of a sudden going to start thinking about it. And that myth is something I have to debunk often. And so the opposite is actually true. The more we talk about it, so I'll just give you an example. Let's say Cliff and I are in the hallway somewhere here at the hotel. Cliff and I are chatting, and Cliff says to me, you know, I lost a family member to suicide, and I wished I would have known ahead of time. I would have done something. I would have loved to have reached out, but I didn't know, right? And so we're having this conversation, and let's say Chrissy walks by, and Chrissy is someone who might be struggling with her emotional health and maybe has had thoughts of suicide. If she overhears people talking openly about how they want to help someone who's feeling suicidal, that could give her hope. Right? So Cliff and I are having an open public conversation. We're not whispering in each other's ears. We're talking very openly and candidly about suicide and how we want to help in the hallway. Someone who is suicidal who overhears that could be encouraged that they don't have to keep a deadly secret any longer. So that's it, the talk's over. We need to talk now. But we do need we need to realize that talking openly about suicide is absolutely, at the very bare minimum, the thing that we need to be doing. We can't be afraid to talk about it. It is scary, all right? And it does take courage to talk about it, and it takes courage to ask people. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more. But if there's nothing else you leave with tonight, I want you to recognize in yourself whatever creates fear in you around this subject, okay? And I want you to wrestle with it. I want you to promise me that you will wrestle with whatever creates fear in you about suicide, okay? It could be that you lost someone to suicide and you're grieving. It could be that you have always heard the myths about how we talk out loud. It might, create the idea in someone that they may end up taking their lives because we talked out loud about it. And so I'm hoping by the end of my talk this evening, you'll have some really good. How much time do you want me to leave for Q&A at the end? Like 15 or something? Okay. And I hope that when you leave a little emboldened, more knowledgeable, and that you feel like you can at least challenge yourself with this idea that all the things that have maybe caused you to hesitate if you felt like someone is at risk, that you may be able to really start to think about what is that about and how can I overcome it, and do I buy into this, and if not, why? And then think about how you might get more information, how you might get more engaged in suicide prevention. Okay, so, I do have some slides of some boring statistics, which I'll sort of fly through a little bit, and I'm happy to share my slides with Chrissy if anyone wants this information sort of permanently. But we do get most of our data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, because they're the ones who collect the National Violent Death Registry System data, and that's how we find out about suicides. I will caveat this with saying that all suicide numbers are always low, because suicides are typically public health data that are collected through either a coroner or medical examiner system. And there are some times when, let's say, parents of a child who lost their child, they came home, they found their child gone. They don't want anyone to know that their child, their precious, sweet son or daughter, died from suicide. And so instead of that, they will say, well, it was an accident, and they want the coroner or the medical examiner to record that on the death certificate, and sometimes that happens. So we also know that there are a lot of opioid deaths or a lot of other drug-related deaths. Those are not always straightforward. We don't always know that those are overdoses. Sometimes they're suicides and we don't know it. There are other things that take a person's life that are suspiciously or possibly suicide. We just don't know. But what we do know is that consistently these things are underreported. So over the last 17 years, Ohio's suicide rates have increased by 36%. Ohio ranks 19th in the nation in suicide rates. Actually, if I was thinking properly, I would have included Kentucky and Indiana since this is a tri-state Freethinkers, so I apologize. I can tell you that I live in Indiana, and Indiana is a little bit lower than Ohio, and I know that Kentucky is, I'm not sure. I might get back with you on that because I should have pulled that data, but I didn't. I don't know why I'm so trapped in Ohio in my brain, so I apologize for that. So consistently, men die by suicide 4 times more than women in every state in this nation and our national statistics. Why do you think that is? Why do you think men die 4 times more often than women from suicide?
Method.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's number 1. What's number 2 reason? Carlos.
They don't tell you when they're having trouble.
That's right. That's right. They don't. What were you going to say?
Post-traumatic syndrome.
Okay. We've got men who suffer from things, whether it's trauma, whether it's mental health stuff going on, whether it's, pervasive personal problems like divorce and other things that cause struggles. And they live in a society that says you're a guy and you need to figure your shit out and you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're not allowed to emote. You have to be a man, right? We call it toxic masculinity, right? You have to subscribe to this gender role of being this strong man. You're not allowed to talk about your stuff. And so women, not only do we talk about our stuff, we really talk about our stuff. We put it out there. It's like, you ain't listening to me. Do you hear me? I'm trying to tell you what I'm feeling, right? Right? And so, we're not all like that. I'm like that. We're not all like that, but women, we are raised with our little girlfriends. Our Barbies are in therapy sessions. It's like Barbies are figuring out how to be good, women or whatever. So we see that our highest suicide rates are among our men. Actually, our highest number of suicide deaths are among our men, and actually our highest number of suicide rates are among our older men. So when I say older, I mean 75 and older, okay? In Ohio, we're losing the rate, right? So just to kind of give you, so there's a raw number. So the raw number of suicide deaths, the highest raw number is men between the ages of 18 and 34, 15, 34, and so males. And then 75 and up is the highest rate. So of all the men in Ohio that are 75 years and older, okay, the highest rate of death right now is suicide. Yeah. So our youth, okay, so suicide is the second leading cause of death among our youth. So, and actually it's the second leading cause in the nation for people 15 to 34. So it's a public health problem. And youth suicides have increased by 56% in the last 10 years. So this is becoming a crisis. Does anyone know where Stark County is? Yep. That's a CDC red zone. They have one of the highest youth suicide rates in the country in that one county.
Is it opioids?
Not among our youth. It's not opioids. It's, we'll get into sort of what the causes of suicide are, but there's never one reason. So we have an increasing burden of suicide behaviors among youth in Ohio as well. So if you think about so if you look at just these 3 years, 2016, 2017, 2018, and if you think about, look at all those counties where the rates have increased, look how the colors change, right? And so it isn't just one concentrated area. We actually have an explosion of suicides across the state. So we only have 4 counties now that are white, less than 1%. So I want to explain to you what suicide is. People who think of suicide think of it as a death from a self-inflicted lethal injury, right? So someone has used a gun, or someone has used a poison, or someone has used asphyxiation or some other means to take their own life. That is a very sort of straightforward definition of suicide. But I'm going to tell you what suicide really is, okay? So imagine that you are in a park or some place where there's like a jungle gym or monkey bars or something, and you're hanging from there. And let's say that there's actually nothing underneath you for maybe 10 feet or so, right? And you know that if you let go, you may injure yourself. And so you're like hanging, and you're like, oh gosh, where are my buddies to help me get down from this, right? And you're hanging and you're hanging. What will eventually happen if you keep hanging there? I guess unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, you can keep your own body weight up. But what happens to you? That's right. You get tired. You weaken. Your strength gives out, right? So when you're someone who is feeling suicidal, okay, you're fighting something perpetually inside you. There's this ambivalence that you wrestle with for a long time. It's like, I don't want to die, but I don't want to live like this anymore. And so there's this tension, right? And that's the hanging on, okay? There are things that help us hang on longer. So imagine if I'm that person hanging from the bar, right? And I look down below and I see that there's nobody down there, and I keep holding on because I don't want to let go because I'm afraid. And then all of a sudden, my friend Jim, right? My friend Jim comes out of nowhere. And then my friend Carlos comes out of nowhere, right? And is it Elle? And my friend Elle comes out of nowhere. What was your name again? Lauren. My friend Lauren comes out of nowhere, right? And all of a sudden, one of you grabs one leg and the other one grabs an arm, and all of a sudden, I don't have to even hold my own weight anymore, right? And it's that tribe of people that have come out of nowhere and have said, you don't have to hold this burden anymore, that I'm here for you. You're not alone. I will help lift you up, right? And so I think that captures, and my new friend Andrew and I were talking before the sessions tonight started about this simple idea of connectedness. And so if there is one antidote that I could prescribe to anyone who's feeling suicidal, it would be this idea that connectedness is the prescription for the things that cause us to feel desperate and alone and like no one cares. And so that's the common theme that we hear across people who are suicidal, is that I'm a burden to you, I don't belong anywhere anymore, or I don't belong anywhere, period, and I now feel like I have no reason to live. And so just having people come in from the corners of our lives to say, I'll hold your leg, I'll hold your other leg, I'll hold your arm, and I'll hold your arm until you get your strength back, right? And that is what helps, I think, personally helps get us through feeling suicidal. How many of you feel completely competent, courageous, uninhibited about asking another person if they're feeling suicidal? Raise your hand if you feel good about that. All right. Mary Kay. All right. Kathy, we've got a handful. Wait, I was going to say, lift your hands up real high. Because, yeah, these are all my sisters. These are all my sisters, okay? All right, put your hands down. Hello, brothers. What's going on with y'all? All right. Women, you are dismissed. Men, you have to stay. I'm just joking. Okay, guess what? You're not alone, though. okay? I'm not going to shame you, all right, because we've all been in that position. You're not alone. I liken this to, so when I talk to my Hope Squad kids, when I get to spend time with my Hope Squad kids, these are kids who have raised their hand and said, I will help you. I don't care what you're going through. I will listen to you, and I will be present with you, and I will sit with you at lunch, and I will walk with you in the hall, and I will talk to you, and I will not judge you ever. Never. I will not judge you. Those are my Hope Squad kids that are in schools who are doing intentional outreach to kids in distress. Okay? And when I get to spend time with them, I'm like lifted up for like a week. They're just so amazing, these kids. If you're ever curious about Hope Squads, just get on YouTube, start watching Hope Squad videos, and you'll be like, I love those guys. They're so amazing. But they started from somewhere. We all start from somewhere. They didn't know why they were picked. They didn't know why their peers nominated them to be, on this Hope Squad thing, and they were scared, And then they said, my peers picked me. They know that I'm a helper. They know that I'm someone who cares, right? And so we train them, and we encourage them, and we support them, and we empower them, and then they go forth into their schools, right? That is my vision for the larger community. My vision for the larger community is to empower people, give them knowledge, give them skills, and give them the self-efficacy to go forth in the libraries or in your where you work, right? Where you meet people, freethinkers, right? And to feel like you have what it takes to go sit next to someone and say, I notice you're struggling. I'm not sure, but I think you might be hurting, and I want to hear about it. I care, right? So you're not alone if you're afraid. It's okay. But I want to ask you something. Well, let me tell you a little story first. So I lived on this street in a neighborhood, and I walk out to water my flowers or something on a summer day. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. And I smelled smoke. And I'm like, where's that coming from? This is not normal, okay? And I see that about 5 houses down, there's a house on fire in my neighborhood on my street. So what do you do when you see a house on fire? What do you do? Chad, what do you do when you see a house on fire? Okay, well, I actually didn't have my cell phone on me. What are some of those first instincts? I ran down there. And I got as close as I could. Actually, I got right to the house, and I was like, is there anyone in there? And I was prepared, if I needed to try and go in there and grab some people and pull them out. And when I'm training my Hope Squad kids, I say to them, you are like firefighters. It is paralyzing sometimes to think about running into a burning building to save a life, okay? You're not going to be the doctor that heals their wounds, their burns. You're not going to be the paramedic. You are simply going to be the person that pulls them out. That is what your job is, okay? And so with suicide prevention, it's that same idea. It's like it feels like suicide is kind of like fire. It is very intimidating. It feels hot, and you feel nervous, and you feel anxious, and you should do something, but you're not sure what, and you think you're going to offend them, right? Of course, you're not going to offend anyone running into their house and saving them from a fire. I think that's how we should think about suicide. If we start thinking about suicide as we are saving someone from peril, okay, then it's not about asking them permission. Oh, hey, Elle, I see that your house is on fire. Is it okay if I grab you and pull you out? She'd be like, hell yeah, get me out of there, right? Would you? Right, yeah.
Where were you when I was in a fire?
I don't know, but if you call, I'm going to put me on speed dial. I'll come get you next time, I promise. Hopefully. Yeah, no, there will not be a next time. So I think because we think of suicide in this way that it's people's personal stuff, and if we ask people, we're intruding, we're being intrusive because it deals with emotions or emotional health or pain, emotional pain and that sort of thing. We live in a society where that stuff is off limits, and I call BS on that. All right. So if Kevin is at the mall, pick a mall. I don't care what mall it is. What's your favorite mall? Do you have a favorite mall? Just pick a place, man. All right. All right. Freaking Kenwood, I don't care. All right. So Kevin and I are at Kenwood. We don't know each other. Kevin's sitting on the bench, and I hear him on the phone, and he's really upset. I don't know who he's talking to, but I just walked out of the store. I'm checking my receipt because I think they overcharged me for something. And I overhear Kevin on the phone having this conversation with someone. He's very upset, and he says, well, I just don't have any reason to live anymore. And he hangs up the phone, and he sits there, and he starts sobbing. All right? I've got a few choices. I could be like, that is none of my business. I am not getting into that man's business, okay? I'm just going to walk away, right? Or I could take a look at him and be like, just give him sort of a compassionate facial expression, and then turn around and keep walking. Or I could sit down next to Kevin and be like, man, I don't know you, and you don't know me, and I know it is none of my business. But I heard what you said, and I'm one of those weirdo people that just cares about people in general, and I want to check in with you, and I want to see if you're okay. I overheard what you said. And so that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to think that getting into someone's business is against social norms, And all y'all are in this room because you don't necessarily believe in all the social norms, right? So I think you already are on the train to giving yourself permission to ask about these things. But if you're not quite there yet, again, like the challenge I gave you at the beginning, just sort of think about why that is. Is it because you really do subscribe to this idea that we're not allowed to ask about emotional pain, we're not allowed to ask about people's personal struggles? Because I would push back on that and say, it is so amazing to have someone you never met before come up to you with compassion and say, wow, I just saw that, and that looks like it may have hurt, and I just really want to know, are you okay? And I know I'm a stranger, and this may feel weird, but I really want to know, are you okay? And I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? Someone's going to be like, bug off, man, leave me alone, and be like, you just asked and did the right thing, right? So they told you to bug off, right? Oh, too bad. You reached out to someone, and what's the best that could happen? You save a life. Someone says, oh, I am at the end. I'm done. I'm so upset. I've been going through terrible time, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back. And then you have an opportunity, right, to engage that person and to talk with them and say, sometimes when people are feeling this bad, sometimes when people are feeling this upset, they think about suicide. Are you having those thoughts? And I may say, no, I'm not. I'm okay. And they convince you, and your gut tells you they're okay, right? Or alarm bells go off a little bit in your head, and you're like, I'm not sure you're okay. Do you mind if we sit and talk a little bit longer? And then you ask the question. Anyway, so I want you to know that you're not alone. It is fear-inducing. It is tough. It's tough. Oh gosh, it's tough to hold on to your hats. That was really quick.
Good job.
Thank you. So I want you to know that whatever keeps you from being able to say the word suicide, to ask about suicide, to think about it, you are not alone. You are among the gabillions of people on the planet who don't want to talk about it, okay? Unless they're watching a really horrible series on Netflix. So suicide is a loss of strength, as I talked about with the hanging onto the bar analogy. The father of suicidology is the study of suicide. I'm sure all of you kind of figured that out. I'm a suicidologist, so I'm someone who studies the phenomenon of suicide for a living. I try to figure out how to prevent it, okay? I feel like the Occam's razor of this whole thing is that it takes all of us and that we have to be the tribes for people, right? Whether they are people we know well, people that we don't know well. But people who are suicidal, they're feeling some sort of intense psychic pain. So the father of suicidology, the gentleman who sort of kicked off a formal study of suicide, so my good friend Andrew and I were talking about Emil Durkheim, who really formulated some of the preeminent theories in suicidology, and then who ran with those theories and started testing them and studying them, was a gentleman named Ed Schneidman. Ed Schneidman, that's a mouthful, he came up with this idea of psychache. So psychache is this intense mental state, this emotional pain that feels irreversible, it feels intractable, it feels unsolvable, okay? And it's when people achieve that level of psychic pain, that emotional pain, this is when they enter into despair, okay? This is when they feel like nothing and no one can help them, all right? Suicide is always intentional. I mean, I know that seems obvious. And it's not the same as ambivalence. Ambivalence is that wave that people who are suicidal are riding until they decide, I don't want to live anymore and I am going to do something about it. They are no longer ambivalent. This is when people are really in danger. And then someone who has the capability, I don't want to minimize how really difficult it is for someone to come to this place where they will use a lethal means on themselves, okay? It is not, you hear these what's the stereotypes, these stereotypes, characterizations of people who are suicidal, oh, they're cowards, and all this kind of stuff. That is complete BS. People who are suicidal have developed some really intense ability to inflict a lethal mean on themselves. We are human beings who are born survivors, right? I will eat out of a trash can before I would die. I would eat something that I don't know what it is, probably. I mean, we do things like that to survive. We are survivors. That's what we're doing on this earth, right? It's just surviving every day, okay? So suicide is counter to survival. It actually takes an unbelievable amount of courage to take a lethal mean and end one's life. It's not an easy task. So people who say, oh, they take the easy way out. Oh, no way. It is not the easy way out. It is not the easy way out. Language really matters. If you've, been listening, you may have noticed, or maybe not, but that I never say commit suicide, okay? I say die by suicide. Sometimes I say die from suicide because it's a disease of despair, okay? And so the reason that we're trying to really shift ourselves away from this idea of committing suicide is, can people commit crimes? We say the language, people commit crimes. And back in the olden days, which really isn't that long ago, suicide was criminalized. You could actually there were legal implications for having attempted suicide, right? And in some religions, and I don't want to use the word criminalized, but in some religions, suicide is that sort of unforgivable sin, because you've taken what, in some religions, you've taken what God has created and you've destroyed it, okay? And so some religions believe that if you take your own life, you'll go to hell. So language matters. We're trying to destigmatize suicide because people who take their own lives are people who really have fought. They really have tried, and they really don't want to live any longer like this because their pain is so intense. It's so overwhelming. It's so overcoming. Okay? And so I think when we start changing the way we talk about suicide, it changes the conversation about suicide. And then people who are suicidal start to understand that this is not something that means that they're a bad person. They don't need to be shamed for feeling like they don't want to be in pain anymore. How many of you have ever, you don't have to actually raise your hand, but you know if you've ever suffered from some sort of chronic pain, if you've ever had some chronic back pain, or if you've ever had something, a surgery or something that's been so painful that you're thinking, just give me a bottle of whiskey. What does the bottle of whiskey do? What does it do? It takes the pain away. It numbs it, right? What happens when the whiskey doesn't work anymore? Well, of course you start smoking marijuana. What happens when the marijuana doesn't work anymore? You keep looking for something else. You're fighting the pain. You don't want to be in pain. Okay. How many of us really enjoy being in severe pain every day? I bet no one would raise their hand. If you do, then that's a whole nother lecture. Okay? We are survivors, and we are also people we also don't want to be in pain, right? So we can actually understand, okay? There's a part of us that says, I can understand why no one wants to be in pain. This is why we have 8 states that have death with dignity laws, because we are allowing people the dignity to not suffer, okay? But we only allow that through physical health channels, right? So if someone is within 6 months, they have to be an adult, they have to be diagnosed with a terminal illness that will take their lives in 6 months or less, certified by 2 physicians, and they cannot, under any circumstances, have a mental disorder that is impacting their competency to make the decision to die, okay? These are almost consistently, in those 8 states, the laws that exist so that someone can go and get prescribed a lethal dose of medication, which only 40% of people who are given that prescription fill it and administer it to themselves. So really, in all those states, all the people who say, I want to die by my own hand, or actually it's take this prescription of this medication, only 40% actually do it who get the prescription. But anyway, I want you to practice, if you will. Challenge number 2 tonight is for you to start practicing talking about suicide differently, right? So think about how we talk about it and whether or not it feels shaming. And if it feels shaming, then I want us to start talking about it in a different way, okay? And that may be something simple like saying someone died from suicide as opposed to saying someone committed suicide, okay? You'll hear things like successful suicide. Oh, does that mean if they didn't kill themselves, they were unsuccessful? You may hear something like completed suicide. Well, if they didn't die by suicide, did they leave something incomplete? So the more we change how we talk about it, the better we're making the landscape for people who are dealing with those thoughts and feelings. What are some risk factors? So this is like that sort of straightforward stuff for you that will help sink your teeth into this phenomenon. Risk factors, if you're a male, you are already at risk. I'm very sorry. Like I said, in the state of Ohio, of all the people who died from suicide last year, 82% were male. 82% were male, okay? And it's those 2 reasons that my friends Kevin and I can't remember who my other, Frank and Carlos, I think, these are the problems, right? Firearms, okay? Firearm deaths. Oh, side conversation or side note. There's a woman, so we had the shooting at Fifth Third this past September. There's a woman named Whitney Austin who was shot something like 12 times. And she has now befriended me because she wants to work together toward ending gun violence, period, but also wants to help work with me on the angle of suicide, reducing suicides through the reduction of firearm access. So, psychiatric diagnoses, psychosocial problems, lack of support, lack of social support, unemployment, rapid changes in the economy. Sometimes you see spikes in suicide rates when we have recessions. Psychological dimensions. So this is that psychic pain, hopelessness. There's a chronic state of agitation that people get into when they're in that ambivalence. When people they don't want to die, but they don't want to live like this anymore. That causes a great deal of agitation. Behavioral dimensions. So prior suicide attempt is the single best predictor of future death from suicide. The single best. So if you know someone who has attempted suicide, your best intervention is to check in with them on a regular basis. Polarized thinking, this is the only way, or this is the only way, right? Trauma, as my friend Frank here mentioned earlier. Genetic and familial. People ask me frequently, is suicide genetic? And I always find that to be a very interesting question. And I say yes. I say yes, it may not necessarily be in your DNA, but it could be in your genetic sort of family cycle. So if, for example, there's a famous sort of story out of Hungary where 14 generations of one family, each generation had multiple suicides. So what happens when that takes place is that it becomes normal. Suicide becomes normalized. It's validated as a way to end my pain and deal with my emotional stuff, right? And so why would I need to live through this stuff if Uncle Joe and great Uncle Bill and so on and so, if everyone ends their pain by taking their own life, then that's the family destiny, it feels like. What are the warning signs? I apologize, this is kind of blurry. People will talk about feeling trapped. They'll talk about being a burden to others. They talk openly about killing themselves. In my world of youth and teen suicide, they'll put it out on social media. And the problem is that there are also a lot of false alarms, right? So kids say things like, well, I'm just going to kill myself, right? And teachers all the time, they're like, how do I know when to take it seriously? I said, here's what you do. Take it very seriously. Take it very seriously. When you do that, and you sit down with them, and you have a really interpersonal conversation about it, chances are really good they're never going to use it like lightly again, because they know you've told this is serious. This is serious. The minute a teen gets the police knocking at their door saying, oh, we heard that you are at risk to yourself, they'd be like, okay, nope, didn't mean it, okay? So that tends to reduce that behavior when we take it seriously. So we teach people to take every threat seriously. Changes in mood, especially if they're sort of sudden, right? I had a mom call me once. She's a friend from high school, and she was really upset. She said she had noticed some behavioral changes in her son, and so she decided to violate his privacy and read his journal. And I said, I feel like that was an okay decision to make, given that you had some information that caused you alarm. And she said that when she read his journal, she saw all these writings about death and drawings of nooses and things. And she says, what do I do? And I said, you go to him immediately. And you sit down with him and you and him and his father. And you sit down and you provide a united front. You first tell him how much you love him and how much you wish you knew what was going on inside him, and that anything that he's got going on inside him is okay. There are no wrong things. Everything is acceptable. I said, when you have laid the foundation for complete unconditional acceptance and love, he'll come out with it. He'll tell you what's going on, and then you can save him. And so we talked every week and we followed up, and she says, that worked. I said, that's all people, that's not magic. It's not magic. People need to know that no matter what they got going on inside them, it is all acceptable. It is all okay, right? Behaviors, increasing use of drug and alcohol, because like I was talking about earlier, when you're in pain, if you're in physical pain, you'll do what it takes to not feel that anymore. This is one of the reasons we have such an opioid crisis, right? Because people get prescribed things, and sometimes we're able to manage, and sometimes that management leads to addiction, and sometimes it doesn't. But sometimes it doesn't, and then it becomes a different problem. So people collecting pills, behaviors where people are trying to hoard pills for someday, for some time. People trying to buy guns. One of the things that we do in suicide prevention is work with gun shop owners to actually just, it's bad business for gun shop owners to have people come in and buy guns and then use them on themselves, right? So actually, we don't have too much trouble engaging people who own gun shops in this effort to ask this simple question, right? So let's say that Mary Kay owns a gun shop. I come into the gun shop and I'm acting kind of nervous and I'm like, I don't know what kind of gun I need. All I know is I need one. And she's like, oh, okay. So, how are you doing today? And she might engage me in conversation. And then she may say, so what do you need a gun for? Just in a very, sort of conversational way. And see, she owns the gun shop. She doesn't have to sell me a gun. She has every right to say no to me, right? And so she may say, what do you need a gun for? And be like, well, I just need one. And she may suspect. And she may say something like, well, I tell you what, let's have you come back in a couple of days, right? And in the meantime, I want to hand you some information, right? And she may hand me some information, and it may be suicide prevention literature, it may be mental health literature, or something like that. And she may also have suicide prevention lifeline numbers hanging in her gun shop and things like that. So that's really one of, access to lethal means is, clearly we want to restrict gun access to people who are going to kill themselves. Visiting, giving away prized possessions, visiting people that you haven't seen in a while, saying goodbye, all that sort of thing. So again, my friend Andrew and I were talking about theories of suicide before tonight got started. And Emil Durkheim, a sociologist, definitely was sort of that first thinker about why people die by suicide. And then a gentleman who's still at Florida State who runs probably the preeminent laboratory in terms of suicidal thought, in terms of studying suicide. And so he has the sort of the most presiding theory currently, and it's this idea that there's this, it's a Venn diagram, but there's this intersection of things that when they kind of come together, that's where someone's at the highest risk. So when someone feels like their belongingness is thwarted, and this can go two ways. It either is, I've either been ousted somehow by my peer group or my tribe, or my brain has tricked me into thinking no one loves me. So I may be surrounded by people who love me, people who care about me, but maybe I am suffering from severe depression, and severe depression sometimes tricks me into thinking I'm not worthy, right? And no one loves me. Okay, so it could be that my belongingness is actually thwarted, which happens with kids a lot, right? Because kids will say, like my daughter, I have a teenage daughter and I have a teenage son, so life is constantly fun, right? But my daughter and son will both be like, well, I don't really have any friends. And I'm like, what? You're constantly hanging out with people. How can you say you don't have any friends? It's because the intimacy has changed. Why? Because we have social media now. They have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of connections, right? But they're not deep, right? So who are they going to talk to when they're feeling despair? Nobody, because they haven't formed deep connections. So thwarted belonging, perceived burdensomeness. When I feel like I'm a burden to you, when I feel like if I tell you my stuff, if I tell you my stories, then I'm just laying my problems at your feet. And that's not fair to you, right? We are so socialized to that. So let's say that Kevin is my brother. And Kevin, let's say Kevin's got his responsibilities. He's got a job and he's got family to take care of and all this stuff. And let's say I'm his sister and I'm going through a divorce and maybe my kid flunked out of school using drugs. I just lost my job because I had to take a bunch of time off work to help with my family situation. And I'm feeling desperate and I'm feeling alone and I'm really sad and I start having suicidal thoughts and I'm ashamed. So I may not go to my brother Kevin may love me. He may say, always tell me, sis, I love you and I'm there for you. And I may actually believe him, but I may think to myself, if I lay my problems at Kevin's feet, I have burdened him with my stuff. And he's already got so many things going on in his life. I don't want to burden him. But what does, so I'm thinking that way, but what's Kevin thinking? If Kevin knew what I was going through, he'd be like, I don't care what I got going on. I love you. I'll do anything for you. Right? So that's part of the problem that we've got going on in society, is that we live in this place where we think we're a burden. We think that our stuff is burdensome, and people want us to share, but we've blocked ourselves. We're all blocked, right? Capability of capability of actually inflicting a lethal mean on myself, and we already kind of talked about that. So we lose 20 veterans a day to suicide. You may know that statistic. It's something you may have heard before. Veterans are one of our highest gun-owning populations, right? They're trained to use the guns. They're not afraid, and they're trained to die. They're not afraid of death. When you enlist or when you join the military, you are trained to kill or be killed as one, some options, right? Majority of people aren't even deployed. But that doesn't really matter, because you still learn how to use a gun and you learn to not be afraid, okay? So you couple that with a lot of the social problems that a lot of our veterans deal with, right? We've got trauma. We've got a lot of veterans who are homeless, suffering from mental disorders, substance abuse or addictions. A lot of our vets lose family ties. A lot of those bonds get severed, so they feel alone. And they've already developed a capability of lethality, because it's just the nature of being in the military. So this is one of the reasons why, or one of the many reasons why we lose veterans to suicide. So I'll tell you a little bit about my personal story. I live in a smallish, so I say smallish because those of you who are from like towns of 1,500 or something, that's small. I'm from Columbus, Indiana, which is a town of about 38,000 people. South, 45 minutes of Indianapolis. It's an hour and a half due west of Cincinnati. And it is the home of Cummins Engine Company. If anyone knows about Cummins diesel engines, this is where the headquarters live, in Columbus, Indiana. It's an aesthetically pleasing town. And in one year, we lost 3 kids to suicide. They were all my daughter's age. And so my daughter says to me, "Mom, you're a social worker, fix it, right? Fix this problem. I don't want to lose any more of my friends." So I said, well, I know a few things, right? I've been in mental health care for 15 years at that point. I know a few things about what we should do, and one of those things is we need to start a community conversation. Parents were terrified. They're like, is my kid next? Is my kid going to be the next one that takes their own life? That fear, and then that fear ends up driving conversations into the home behind closed doors. People weren't talking about it. So I did something really kind of just simple. I started a Facebook group. Isn't this what we always do? Well, maybe not always, but I started a Facebook group and I said, okay, everyone who wants to talk about suicide or doesn't, come here, because you can learn without actually having to say anything, right? You can come to this Facebook group as kind of a, I don't know, just a stalker or something, and read a bunch of stuff which will help you understand what this is about. And you can privately message me if you have questions, and I will answer them. So I started that, and then we did a huge community meeting where we taught our community about suicide, how to help, and what our next steps should be as a community. And we had like 500 people in our smallest town. That's a good number of people attend this meeting. And so our community initiative began. And we're almost 5 years down the road, and we're still having a community conversation about suicide prevention. We've got a couple of Hope Squads going there now. It's really become a much broader, bigger initiative. I'm really excited about it. So what are the things that we do in suicide prevention? We do prevention work, which is things like this, where I'll give talks, ask directly about suicide, train people on doing suicide prevention in communities. These are the things that we do to try and reduce suicide rates in a universal way, okay? With just all of us, common people, right? Not doctors, not psychiatrists, not mental health professionals, just all of us. Intervention are activities aimed at therapeutically trying to help someone change their mind about living and dying. And that's more of those therapists' roles, right? The people who sit down and say, okay, let's start to think differently about what you've got going on. Postvention are things that happen in the wake of a crisis. So if someone has died by suicide. So is anyone from the Cincinnati area? Or is anyone from Anderson Township? Okay, so Turpin High School this year, which is in Anderson, which is sort of the Beachmont area, they lost 2 boys within 8 days to suicide this past school year. I worked with that school system for a long, long time, trying to work with their community, trying to help with the messaging around losing these lives. And that's postvention. We have to be very careful because there's a potential for something called contagion, where people who are already in distress before lives are lost to suicide start to feel emboldened because they say, well, they're not in pain anymore. I don't have to be in pain either. And so there's certain steps that we have to take, ways that we message and talk about suicide in the wake of deaths that helps to minimize the chances of this contagion phenomenon happening. So I'm going to revisit a few things here, but these are the things that we talk about when we talk about what works in suicide prevention. Lethal means restriction, so I talked a little bit about the gunshot project. So if you happen to find yourself asking someone if they're suicidal, your next question should be, do you have a plan? And what is it? And if someone says, yeah, I've got like 4 bottles of pills, okay, so when we talk about suicide, we try not to, we want to make sure we're not advertising, right? We want to make sure that we're not saying, okay, this is a way to kill yourself, because, you know, depending on your audience, if someone is struggling in the audience, you clearly want to be very, very mindful of what people are going through. But I can tell you that when I worked in the emergency room with people, when people coming in who had had suicide attempts, a lot of people did things like just take an entire bottle of Tylenol. An entire bottle of Tylenol will kill you, okay? It'll shut your liver down, okay? And so there are some very easy, so people will say, I'll say, what's your plan? You know, what is your plan? And they'll say, well, I'm going to go home and take a bottle of Tylenol. And I'll be like, well, we need to get rid of the Tylenol. And we need to have someone there with you keeping you safe. So lethal means restriction. So that could be guns, it could be pills, it could be removing knives in the home, it could be removing razors in the home, it could be removing anything that someone could use to hang themselves. It could be taking the car keys away. These are lethal means restrictions. Hotlines, making sure everybody's got hotline numbers in their hands. Crisis text line numbers. Peer programs like the Hope Squad. I described that to you already. We've got about 600 Hope Squads in the country. And in fact, some parts of Kentucky are looking at doing Hope Squads in their schools, but we've got, by the end of the 2019-2020 school year, we'll have 90 Hope Squads in Ohio. We only have a few in Indiana because Indiana is a pain in my fanny. I can say, I'm from Indiana, so I can say that. Anyone else from Indiana here? Frank and I, we're the Hoosiers. Are you a basketball fan?
Nope.
Frank, then you're not really a Hoosier. Huh?
Hey, wait a minute, the family came here from England and settled in Rising Sun in 1830.
Oh, wow. You're some original settlers. Oh, Frank, I thought we were going to be friends. We'll find some other things we like in common. Oh, maybe. I don't know. Might be. We'll talk later. Community outreach and gatekeeper training. Okay, so this is really my wheelhouse. I work with entire communities, whether it's a school community or a town or a city. I guess I'm giving a talk next month to the entire city. This is the city of North College Hill. But I will, if someone calls, right, it may take me a while, but I'll get there. The idea is that I'd like to equip you, and I'd like to send you off and say, do the thing, right? Keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, keep your hearts open, and be willing to ask if the occasion should arise. I'm not saying you're going to walk up to everyone at Kenwood Mall and be like, hey, you feeling suicidal today? No. If you see someone in emotional distress, if someone you love has slipped into despair, I want you to ask. I want you to stop and make them feel like they are the only thing that you've got going on in the moment. And it doesn't take very long. When people know that you're connecting your heart with theirs and that they are the only thing that matters in that moment, that is really powerful. The power of your presence with someone, right? You don't have to, and in fact, I encourage people who say, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to say. I am not exactly sure the right thing to say right now, but I want you to know that I care about you, and I care about your heart, and I care about your life, and I don't want to see you go anywhere. And so if that's all I can say, then I will sit here and listen, right? I will listen to you, and I will feel what you're feeling. That's empathy, right? Everybody's probably a Brene Brown fan in here, right? You want a sandwich? Only the real Brene Brown fans would know what I mean by that. So community outreach to me means just being willing to be eyes and ears when you're out in your public places or in your private places, and be willing to do something if the moment calls you to do it. And if you need more training and more self-efficacy building to get this done, I would encourage you to get something called a gatekeeper training, right? And those are offered in lots of different places, and a gatekeeper training is where you learn all the risk factors and warning signs for suicide. You learn how to persuade someone to stay alive. And you're going to have a sense of that when you leave here tonight, because I've talked a lot about it, but I haven't given you the actual training. But one of the ones we use with the Hope Squad is called Question, Persuade, Refer. It's one of the biggest and most well-researched gatekeeper trainings. So we talked about firearms already. In male deaths by suicide, about 65% of those are by firearm, which is a staggering statistic. I would love, oh, you know what? I have little cards for you, and I left them in my car. I may have to run out and get them and come back after we're done. But they're these little cards, and they've got the Suicide Prevention Lifeline number on it for you. And if you open it up, it's like a tiny little brochure. You can put it in your wallet. It's got like little risk factors and warning signs in there for you. But you actually, this is a community health issue, and I think it takes communities to reduce it. You hear a lot about the same things in terms of opioids and deaths and stuff, and if you see things, see, and we teach kids, if you see something, say something. And people, are afraid, and it's understandable that they're afraid. And so I guess I want you to think about, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I want you to think about where you are on the spectrum. So if you were to rate yourself, oh gosh, sorry, but I can't do it anymore. I know, it's like your hair just gets it gravitates, it's like a magnet, hair magnet. If you were to put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being, no problem, I will do it, I will answer the call, I will ask someone who I observe to be in despair, how they're doing, are they okay? I will admit that I don't always have the right things to say, but I'm going to try. I'm going to be present. If you're a 10 on that scale, then yay. If you're a 1 because you're terrified and you're like, I'm not there yet, I really need to spend some time thinking about what makes me so nervous, so hesitant, or I'm in a place of my own grief right now, or I'm struggling, right? And so it's sort of like that idea where the airplane thing, right? So I was sitting next to Christy on the airplane. She's 4 years old, and I'm 44. And, what am I supposed to do when the oxygen mask drops down? I'm supposed to put it on my own face and take some deep breaths, and then I help her because she's a child and she doesn't know what the thing is and what she's supposed to do, right? So I cannot help her if I haven't helped myself first, right? So it's the same idea. If you're struggling really, really badly yourself and your emotional health is really, you're not doing well, then you may struggle reaching out to someone else. And then what can happen is it can kind of implode, because what you end up doing with someone who's also struggling in their emotional health is you sort of commiserate, right? You go down, you're like, oh, we're both in the place that's dark, right? This year, we had 3 girls in the Cincinnati area. We lost 1 to suicide, and 3 of them had a suicide pact. The other 2 got caught before they died. I'm thankful for that. But that can happen, right? So if you're struggling, I would encourage you to get yourself, your tribe surrounding you, some professional help if that's appropriate. Because it's not, I mean, mental health care can be wonderful in the right circumstances with the right provider and the right fit and all that. But I think there are a lot of other things that bring us healing and understanding about how suffering and what happens in this world and why suffering exists. And so if you're a 1 and you're afraid, that's okay. I don't want you to think that it's not okay to be there because you have your reasons. I just want you to ponder those reasons. And I want you to ask yourself what it will take to get you up from a 1 to a 2 to a 3 to some place where you feel comfortable with something, right? So that's the challenge I place before you. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get into a little like case study kind of exercise is I mentioned this to, I can't remember who I was talking to earlier, but one of the things I've struggled with is I was raised by a mother who believed and a father who I'm pretty sure was on the fence about religion and God and so forth. And then I got to a place where I wrestled and I wrestled and I wrestled and I became a non-believer, okay? As a suicidologist and a non-believer at the same time, this is a very tricky place to be, okay? Because I have only met like 2 other people who do what I do in the whole country who are non-believers. We are a very small group of people. We're like 4. So I don't even know if that's a group, right? It's just 4. Because it is very difficult to work in death and not believe that there is an afterlife. So I am soliciting you for ideas about how to have those conversations with people in a way that is meaningful and productive and not, and can be healing still, right? I have some ideas, but if you have ideas, and maybe that's not tonight's talk. I mean, maybe we can talk about that another time. Maybe I can come back another time after we've all chewed a little bit on how to have conversations about suicide, death, and not have a religion context surrounding that. People, just in terms of death, period, that's one of the reasons why people cling to their beliefs, is because they can't imagine that this is the only life we have and that this is the one shot that we have. Okay, so thank you for entertaining all of that with me. So in the last 10 minutes before I take Q&A, I'm just going to present maybe a little kind of case study, and then I want you to kind of think about your comfort level with something like this. So let's say you've got a neighbor, okay, and his name is Joe. And Joe's 58 years old, he's a veteran, he just lost his wife 3 months ago. They were married for 40 years. And for the very first time in 3 months, you see Joe out of his house. Normally he'd be out there mowing and trimming the shrubs and pruning the flower, or whatever you do with flower. I'm terrible, I don't have a green thumb. I'm one of the green thumb, but I'm terrible. So you're out of the house in your yard, you see Joe for the first time, and you know he lost his wife. You know that he must be grieving. What do you do when you see Joe out there?
I invite Joe to sit on my porch for a cup of coffee.
Cup of coffee. A cup of Joe for Joe. Cup of Joe with Joe. I love it.
As a result of this meeting, I know that he's at risk.
Ah,
Right? Because
you're already counting all the risk factors for Mr.
Right.
Joe, aren't you? You're like,
he-
wait.
He probably won't kill himself.
Okay.
But risk, and so a certain percentage of people like him will do it. So you want to kind of make sure to help him not be one of those.
Mark, you raise, is it Mark or Mac?
Mark.
Okay, because I don't have my glasses on. You raised two excellent points. First of all, he's automatically at risk. He's a veteran. He's a man. Okay? He just lost his wife. He's grieving. Okay? You haven't seen him out of the house in 3 months, so you know his grieving's probably complicated. All right? So those are all risk factors. So kudos to you. The other thing you said that was so important is that most people that even those who think about suicide, most of them do not go through with it. It is actually quite rare. However, interestingly, we lose twice as many people to suicide as we do to homicide. We lose 47,000 people a year to suicide. We lose half of that to homicide. But yet, on the news, you hear about homicides all the time. We just had 40 people die from mass shootings in the last 3 days. And you're thinking, how is it that we lost we lost probably 3 times that many in suicide over the weekend. But we don't know who they are because we don't run news stories about them unless they're famous, right? Okay. So, Joe tells you that he cannot seem to move beyond his wife's death in any way. She was his best friend. All he can do is mourn. It's all he can do to get out of bed. So he tells you this stuff, maybe on the porch while you're drinking coffee together. What do you do? What do you say? What are some things you say to Joe at this point when he says all he can do is cry, all he can do is mourn? Okay, so you say to yourself, Joe, my best friend lost her husband a couple years back. I remember how bad she felt. I think she was kind of in the same place you were. And you know what? She went to Fernside, which is this place over here, and I don't know what the address, but and they help people who have lost their loved ones. And I wonder if you would consider that. Yeah. So you might think about, kind of normalizing it with a story, and then validating his feelings and offering him some resources.
Maybe you can also say that, look, it's okay to mourn.
Yeah.
It's okay to be sad that your wife died.
Yeah, forever.
Right.
You loved her for 40 years. It's okay forever to be sad. No one should ever expect you to get over that grief. Yeah.
What support system is Youre?
Ah, what an excellent question. Who do you have in your life? Who can come and be with you? Do you have, does he have adult children maybe? Do they know that Dad hasn't left the house in 3 months? That is an excellent question. You guys are awesome. I want you to be my neighbors. Where do you live? When I move to Cincinnati, or into the area, I want to maybe live in your neighborhood. Maybe there's a Freethinkers condominium we could start or something. I don't know. You decide to check in on Joe every couple days or something. He answers the door, but he doesn't really let you in. Okay? Maybe he comes out to the porch, or maybe he does accept invitations to come have coffee. But then you can kind of see, you look around, his house is in disarray, and maybe it looks like he hasn't taken a shower in a long time, right? So what do you do?
Maybe you do invite him over for a cup of coffee because, most people, he's in his house. He's like, I'm not going to take a shower because he's not leaving the house.
Yeah.
But if you invite him over for a cup of coffee,
Oh.
maybe he will just do some stuff.
I love that idea. You're giving him A, a reason to leave the house, B, an additional reason to take a shower, because we all have this social capital, right? If I go to your house, if I go to Cliff's house and I'm not fresh, Cliff may be like, do you need some extra cream in that coffee, Jennifer? Or something, anything, hazelnut, whatever. Yeah, it gives you more reasons to become sort of human again, because I'm going to have to engage, I'm going to have to be in someone else's space, and so I may have reasons to freshen up a little bit. That's
And
a,
then,
yeah,
while you got him on the porch,
yeah,
it's so easy to say, I mean, this is what we do in our neighborhood. People walk.
yeah.
My porch, I have a great, beautiful porch with trees all around, so it's very comfortable. But people get roped into my porch because it's comfortable. Have a rest, have a drink. Now it's the known place to stop in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
And so with Joe next door, you know, if folks say you kind of know if he's your neighbor, you kind of know who his family is, or if even his family
Yeah.
is close to.
yeah,
And if not, you can work with a few neighborhoods to get Joe some food.
yeah.
Or to invite Joe over.
Oh, Mary
You know,
Kay, I
not
love
in the
that.
house, because that's threatening to folks, but they'll sit on the porch.
Yeah, I
They will
love
sit
it.
on the porch and have
I'm
a
stealing
sandwich.
these ideas.
They'll
You don't
sit
get
on
to
the
claim these
porch
as your
and
own.
have
I'm
a
going to steal them.
salad.
That's wonderful. It's beautiful. So does anyone know what the casserole paradox is? It's sort of what Mary Kay's talking about. So she must have cheated and looked at all the notes ahead of time. So the casserole paradox is this. So let's say, I haven't picked on Chad again. So let's say Chad's my neighbor, okay? And let's say I was just diagnosed with cancer, all right? And Chad hears about it. And he says, well, Jennifer's got cancer. Maybe she's in treatment and having trouble. Maybe she can't cook. I'm going to make her a lasagna. Do you cook lasagna, Chad? You do now. So Chad makes me this beautiful lasagna. He brings it over and he says, here, you can freeze it, you can make it, whatever, but you don't have to cook for the next 9 days because I've cut them into individual servings for you for the next 9 days. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's say that actually, instead of cancer, let's say I had a suicide attempt and I got injured in my suicide attempt, or I'm recovering. And Chad is my neighbor and he hears about it. What do you think? Do you think he makes the lasagna?
He should.
He should make the lasagna.
Yeah,
But,
Chad.
yeah, Chad, poor Chad. He's like, of course I'm getting picked on the hardest scenario there is. But that's the casserole paradox, okay? Is when people will do something for someone given that the condition they're suffering from is sort of socially acceptable, right? Socially acceptable and devastating to have cancer, but is it socially acceptable that I just tried to take my own life, right? Is someone going to come and say, I rally with you, I'm going to cook for you, I'm going to clean your house, I will transport you, I will do whatever I need to do to support you? We'll do it for someone who has cancer. Are we going to do it for someone who has just had a suicide attempt or recovering in terms of their mental health or something? Chances are slim. Today when you visit Joe, you can tell he's not doing well at all. You ask if you can come in. Defeated, he lets you come in. You sit down to talk with him. He says he doesn't want to go on living without his wife anymore. Now what do you do?
I would tell him I first of all understand what he means by that. Maybe I can't relate to it personally, but I understand what he's
Yeah.
saying.
So Kevin's beautiful default is, I'm going to validate your feelings, Joe. I'm going to validate the fact that it is understandable that you are suffering so badly, that you're hurting so badly, that you might not want to feel like that anymore. Excellent. Exactly. Beautifully done. Anything else? Are there other things you might do?
I think just sharing a personal story of how I got through grief, you know, when Tom died, you know.
Yeah.
Just getting, for me, it's always been getting out of myself and volunteering,
Yeah.
you know, and somebody's always in worse shape than you are, even if you think you're in shape.
Okay.
There's always somebody in worse shape, you
Yeah.
know. And it's helpful to me to go find those folks.
Yeah. So building trust through personal stories and validation. Those are great.
I would say that I hope that you don't do anything to hurt yourself, and I would really miss you.
Okay. So I will, okay, I'm going to add on to what you're saying and say the best way to address potential risk, if we suspect there's risk, is to say, are you having thoughts of suicide? So just come right out and ask. Very straightforward and just in a very kind and compassionate tone, say, I really care about what happens to you, and I'm wondering, are you having thoughts of suicide? Yes, Mark?
What if you don't like the guy, and you're busy, and you're a one, and you don't really
Right.
want to have anything to do with this?
Which is 98% of our population, yeah.
But you feel a little guilty. Because,
Okay.
you know, what I'm thinking is somewhere between doing nothing and having tons of time cooking for the guy every day.
Yeah.
Is you do a little bit.
Okay.
And sometimes a little bit would be better than nothing.
Yep.
It would be enough. So maybe you give them the suicide hotline number.
Okay.
And you say, I'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock.
Yep.
And I expect you to be here because I'm going to bring you a surprise or something.
Okay, so
And-
this is excellent. This is,
And then
yep.
so you do show up tomorrow, and
Yep.
you don't spend much time, but you know, you check in on them.
Yep. Yep.
And it gives the person kind of something to look
Yep.
forward to. Is
Yep.
it, you know, he thinks, is Mark really going to come back that next day, and what's he going to bring me? And
Yeah.
maybe I ought to see what that is.
You just bought a car, you're trying to restore it. This guy is excellent at this stuff, and you're like, hey man, I got a project, and guess what? I need you. I need you. That's an excellent way to do it. I'm going to add on to that by saying, if you're a 1 and you don't feel comfortable, find an 8 or a 9 or a 10 to partner with you to take the opportunity to ask, right? So if you're not comfortable asking, who's this lovely woman sitting next to you? Joan? Maybe, I'm not going to assume anything about Joan, but let's just pretend that Joan is an 8, right? And that Joan says, I might be able to sit with Joe and have coffee with Joe and ask Joe if he's having thoughts of suicide. And that may be a better fit in terms of getting the question asked. So when I train schools, not all teachers feel comfortable asking kids whether or not they're having thoughts of suicide. Even though they work with kids, they're like, I didn't sign up for that. Like, I don't know how to do that, right? So I say, use the buddy system, right? There are also people who would not run into a burning building, you know, and to try to save a life. They just are so terrified, or something else, right? They're thinking of their own kids. They're thinking that they might die. There's just all kinds of things that paralyze us from doing some things, fill in the blank, whatever it is. There's a sociological experiment in New York City many years ago. It's kind of famous, where a guy pretends to collapse on the city streets, and they counted how many people passed by him before someone stopped to help. How many was it? How many do you think it was?
20.
Nope. Nope. Frank, how many? Oh, yes, 1 or 2? Mm-mm. It was 80 people. 80 people walked by. And when they went back and caught some of those folks and interviewed them, they said, oh, I thought he was sleeping, or I thought he was just a homeless bum. And they're like, no one stopped to check on this guy. Okay. Yeah.
So going back to that scenario, maybe before you ask him whether you think you ask him, you know, are you thinking about committing suicide? Or after, if he says yes, and you don't feel that you're qualified to take it on anymore, is there a 911 for, I think my neighbor's going to commit suicide?
Yes, it's 911.
It's 911.
It is. It is. So there's something called a well check. So if you are afraid of someone is at risk for any reason, it could be suicide, it could be, let's say you see Joe, you don't think he's eaten in 10 days, and you feel like he's literally going to starve to death. Anything that you think is cause for a serious life-threatening alarm, the police can do a well check. And they will go to the home, and they will knock on the door, and they will not leave until they've seen this person, unless they suspect the person's not home, actually not there. And they will ask those questions. They will ask those questions for you. So, I mean, that's always an option for you. I would also, I can't remember who said something about calling family or seeing if there's family available, things like that, using the buddy system. But you can also call as someone who is not suicidal, you can call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline yourself and say, I have no idea what to do. Can you help me? And they'll say, give us his number. We'll call him. We'll call him and talk to him. So there's options like that. Yeah.
I've heard that some of our local police departments are debating whether they will get involved with suicide directly.
I'm not familiar with that, so I'd have to probably look into that. I mean, it's no less concerning situation than someone holding up someone to kill them. I mean, like killing yourself or killing self-directed violence, other directed violence is still police-worthy violence. So I've not heard that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to follow up on that and see, yeah, what that's about. Carlos?
Okay, say you've gotten someone to confide in you that they're maybe having some suicidal thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
How appropriate is it then to share that information with other people? Like say, you're thinking of telling that person's family member.
Yeah.
Is that person who lives in their household, you can keep a better eye on that person than you.
Yeah, if you feel like safety is an issue, I recommend drawing in other resources.
Okay, so the other person who just confided something very personal to you, maybe now feels like you betrayed them, their trust.
Better a pissed off friend than a dead friend.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we tell the kids. Don't ever keep a deadly secret. Yeah, they may. I know people whose relationships have been destroyed because they told on them and they said, I don't regret it. I'd rather them be mad at me for the rest of their lives and be alive. So, yeah.
What I mean though is like, what if you're worried that that person might not share information with you going forward? You know, because like now you're like, now they if they're feeling bad, they won't share it with you because they'll think, well, just go tell my wife.
Yeah, I know that is a consequence of telling. I have a lot of friends who have suicidal thoughts who I know are not at risk. So if someone tells you I'm feeling suicidal, follow-up questions would be, do you have a plan and a time frame? And if they're like, no, I don't really know that I would do it, or I wouldn't do it because my kids, or I wouldn't do it because of my spouse or partner or whatever. I just feel terrible, and I just don't want to live like this anymore. Then that's a point at which I would say, okay, is it okay if I check in on you? Like, I want to know. And I'm a researcher, so I use scales a lot. So I'll be like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being, if I left the room right now, you would find a way and you would die. Or 1 being, you have just the very fleeting thought from time to time, and you really don't feel like you're at risk. Where are you at? And it gives you an introductory sense of where they're at in terms of risk. If they're up in that 7, 8, 9, 10, that's where the red zone. I would be very concerned in that space. If they're in the yellow zone, like 4, 5, 6, I would still, check in on them regularly, maybe daily. If they're down in that green space, it's probably something where it's a coping mechanism. But I would have resources available. Like, I don't know where all of you live, so I can't give you one specific resource except for the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. But, mental health centers, emergency rooms, a lot of mental health centers have psychiatric crisis centers. I know in Cincinnati, I know the resources a lot better than I do in northern Kentucky and southern Indiana. Lawrenceburg Center for CMHC, mental health centers. These are the places where people can go to get the kind of therapy and the kind of things they need to start thinking about their problems differently in ways that don't incorporate suicide as the option. So I think it might be taking it upon yourself to have some of those numbers handy and being able to offer those numbers to people. Because at the very minimum, if someone genuinely doesn't have family, genuinely doesn't have people in their lives, being able to give them resources is something. Does that make sense? Or is that okay? Okay. So I think, we're kind of at that place where you guys are already anticipating some of these things, but have your resources on hand. Suicide Prevention Lifeline number, numbers for local crisis. You can look those up, Google, right? Or just write them down, keep them in your wallet, asking them if they're having suicidal thoughts is not going to make them have suicidal thoughts. They either do or they don't. Remember, people just want the pain to end. They really, if you could take the pain out of the equation, they're going to want to live. So they just need to figure out how to deal with this pain. And no one's asking you to figure that out for them. Someone else has to figure that out for them. But if you give them hope that things can get better and that therapy and these things really can help, then they've got something to look for. I love what Mark said about, hey, maybe I can engage them on, maybe I don't feel comfortable talking to them about suicide, but maybe I feel comfortable saying, hey man, help me fix this lawnmower, help me do this project, or help me, I'm going to come over and we're going to do this thing, or, we've got a coffee date, on the porch at, 9 a.m. every day, I expect you to be there. I mean, that is giving someone hope through giving them companionship or connectedness, reducing their isolation. And then while you're with them, you can do some things to lift them up, right? And they don't have to be hovering around this topic of suicide. And that's that engaging others, right? Engaging family, engaging neighbors, like Mary Kay mentioned, and getting other people as part of that tribe. So how do you ask? There's some ideas here. Joe, I can't imagine the pain of losing a spouse. I'm concerned that you mentioned life might not be worth living anymore. Have you had thoughts of ending your life? So you don't have to rush in and just say, oh, hey man, you suicidal? I mean, sometimes it comes out that way because we're nervous or anxious about it. And, asking is better than not asking. So maybe the way it comes out isn't as important as the fact that you ask. But, I know we've not known each other long. This originally was a clinic, an audiology clinic training, so I still have that language in here. I meant to change it. I got some of it changed, but you're like, wait a minute, I'm just your audiologist. In our case, it'd be Joe. I know that we've been neighbors for a long time, that we haven't spent a lot of time getting to know each other, but I do, I care about what happens to you, and I'm wondering, are you having thoughts about ending your life? And I want to know, and if the answer is yes, I want you to know that that's okay. I may not have all the answers, but maybe I can give you some resources or some things that might be able to help. Okay, so thoughts, ideas, concerns, questions, suggestions. Andrew.
What about outrageous blackmail? Someone falsely threatening to kill themselves just to manipulate.
Yeah, so there are situations where people. Where does that come from, though? So when people use suicide as a leverage, as emotional manipulation, that's still coming from a place of pain. It's still coming from a place of despair. And it's still worthy of saying, I'm not sure if you're being serious, but I really want to know, are you having thoughts of suicide? So
if it isn't out of pain, but sheer greed, evil, I want something, say whatever I have to get what I want, and if this will work, this is what I'll do.
I would still ask him the question, because sometimes asking the question diffuses some of that behavior, right? And if you are feeling really flummoxed, I suppose, and like you're having a really hard time being compassionate because the person's behavior is really, really outrageous, then I might step away and breathe, and I might engage someone else and use the buddy system and not put myself alone in that situation, but try to engage that person in as healthy a way as you possibly can, given that maybe their behavior is totally outrageous. Outrageous behavior has an etiology. I mean, there's still reasons. Behavior has reasons. We may not understand them, we may not agree with them. In fact, they may make us really pissed off, but there are reasons for it. And we don't have to figure out what those reasons are because we may not all be like behavior experts. But if you just know at the very baseline that behavior has reasons, it can really help you grapple with your own response to it. And so I would say don't ever enter into a situation where you feel like you're going to lose yourself or that you're going to operate in a way that's really destructive because you're so caught up in it, I would step aside in that situation, let someone else maybe handle it. But I've seen that before. I've seen that before. It's tough. I'll agree with you. That's a really tough situation. Yes?
The suicide rate in Kentucky, two things. The suicide rate in Kentucky in 2018 was 17.9.
That's high. That's definitely higher than the national average, yes.
And what are your thoughts on death with dignity?
I'm all for it. Yeah. Here's the thing. I'm just going to be real with y'all. It gets really gray for me. Kids, I say up to the age of 25, 26, we're still developmentally figuring out what the world's all about. I'm 46. I'm still figuring out the world, right? We're always figuring out the world. But with kids, for me, it's a non-starter. Suicide's not an option, okay? There are even controversies within that, though. I'm going to be a concrete thinker when it comes to kids, and I'm going to admit I'm a concrete thinker when it comes to kids. I don't think kids should take their own lives. As we become adults, there are so many things that complicate our ability to function, and it gets really murky. And so in a very sort of straightforward death with dignity, I'm already dying, I think people should have the right to decide how they want the rest of their days to play out, right? How many of those days they should have, how their struggles. But adults in general and suicide, I mean, I don't think there's one right answer. And so I'm always willing to talk about it, but I'm also willing to say, I don't know any more than anyone else. You know, when someone is really, really, really suffering, who am I to say you should continue to suffer? Who am I, right? So suffering it's an existential thing. When people are suffering, you know, and someone else is saying, I'm going to swoop in and save you. I'm going to keep you from taking your own life. Like, if I can't solve your suffering, who am I? The only thing I can do is try to be present with you and try to do something to alleviate your suffering, right? So, yeah, but death with dignity for me is a yes. Yes?
Last one.
Okay, all right, we've got our, it's a two-parter. Is that okay? All right. Oh, that's right, because we're.
How does our country compare to other countries and maybe
Ha-ha! Yes. So in terms of suicide rates, our suicide rates are higher, but our death with dignity rates are lower because we don't allow it as much. Other countries are much, much more fluid with death. We don't have a death-positive culture here, first of all, right? So Bart Campolo, the guy who talked last month, if you saw him, he's got a podcast called Humanize Me. One of his best episodes is a woman who runs something called a death salon, and it's fascinating stuff. But as a society, we just do not have death-positive conversations. In other countries, death is viewed much, much differently, even suicide death. Now, there are countries where suicide is actually an acceptable way to do various, it's an answer to various problems, right? And so we don't have that here. That's not our dialectic. We basically say suicide is essentially wrong. So it's not a straightforward answer. I would say at a baseline, our suicide rates are higher in some ways and lower in some other ways, depending on what kind of like suicide we're talking about. So like Japan, some suicide rates in Japan are high. You know, culturally, it's becoming less stigmatized. I mean, people say, oh, stigma's good around suicide. It reduces, yeah, but it also reduces help seeking, right? So I wish I could give you kind of a cleaner answer, but yeah, it's not very straightforward. Yeah.
And my follow-on is, the factors you were saying, or some of the behaviors was, there were addictions and things like
Yeah.
that. So this is my judgment. To some degree, that's sort of a slower way of numbing out.
Yeah, so when it doesn't work anymore and you're still faced with all the things that are causing your pain and the substance abuses aren't working to numb it out anymore, you may start to think about suicide as an option as opposed to continuing to use substances.
So if someone is in that pattern and they fit the profile, male, 60 years old, I guess you find a time when they're not under the influence to have that conversation.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't, so the key is despair, right? So if someone is in despair because they have an addiction and they're wrestling with it and they can't get out of it, and the despair is the key to asking the suicide question. Someone who just has an addiction and who happens to be a male and happens to fit some demographics, that's not necessarily equivalent to suicide risk. The despair with these feeders, right, with these risk factors leading up into this despair, the despair is the key piece, right?